This video is of a talk given before the Washington County Public Affairs Forum. Every Monday at noon at the Beaverton's Elks Club, the forum presents speakers who discuss politics, public affairs, or business issues that affect Washington County, Oregon. The programs are videotaped by Tualatin Valley Community Television and are broadcast over TVC-TV as well as streamed from the WashingtonCountyForum.org website. The programs are also available as audio or video podcasts. If you enjoyed this broadcast, please check out our other offerings on our website at WashingtonCountyForum.org. We hope that you find this presentation enlightening and enjoyable. Thank you for watching.
So, with great pleasure, I give you a man who sits on a number of committees: Finance, Select Intelligence, Budget, the Committee on Aging and Energy and Natural Resources, as well as subcommittees on Forest and Public Land Management and Science, Technology, and Space. A very busy man who has time for you, Senator Wyden. Senator Ron Wyden.
What an inflationary introduction, John, and I thank you for it. I am given a little bit shorter talks than I have in the past. Not long ago I was home and was talking about some of the changes in Medicare and trying to explain them to folks, and when I was done, all the seniors came running up and said, "Ron, what a great talk you've given. So brilliant and so important and so masterful. We've got to get it all written up in the press." And they went on and on. They thought it was so great. I knew I hadn't said anything particularly special, and I thought I ought to try to wrap it up. And so I said to one of the seniors, "Well, ma'am, maybe the papers will write it up someday. You know, they'll write up my remarks posthumously." And this wonderful elderly woman said, "Oh boy, Ron, in your case, I hope that's really soon." So I have been giving a little bit shorter talks. And I thought I'd take just a few minutes and give you my sense of where we are on health care, and then let's kind of throw it open almost as much to a kind of Washington County town meeting as much as and anything else. You know, you start this discussion about health care, and I'm so glad that Nellie and Mary Alice are up here with me. You know, what a bipartisan duo, I might add. And how about a big round of applause for two wonderful, wonderful advocates for our state. Two wonderful advocates for our state for decades and decades. And it's so good to be with both of you. And thank you both for your great contributions to Oregon. And I think, you know, Nellie and Mary Alice and all who've been involved in this debate about health, we start by saying, how can it be that a country as rich and strong and good as ours can't figure out health care? How can it be? We certainly got terrific doctors and hospitals and providers. We're spending enough money. How can't we figure this out? Here's the math this year. We're going to spend about $2.3 trillion as a country. There are 300 million of us. You divide 300 million into 2.3 trillion, and you could go out and hire a doctor for every 7 families in the United States. And say, "Doc, it's all you got to do this year. You're going to take care of 7 families. We're going to pay you $200,000 a year. That's what you'll do." Whenever I bring this up with the physicians, they always say, "Where do I go to get my 7 families?" They'd like to be doctors again. So we're spending enough money, folks. We're not spending it in the right places. And I think that what makes this different now, and what we're trying to do in the Healthy Americans Act, this is the first bipartisan health reform bill in 14 years in the United States Senate. We've got 5 senators on the legislation. And it's built around the idea that Democrats have been right to say that to fix health care, you got to get everybody covered, because if you don't cover everybody, people who are uninsured shift their bills to people who are insured. But the Republicans are right in saying that you shouldn't just turn all this over to government. You can't just turn it all over to government and expect everything to come out just Jim Dandy. And it involves making some changes in areas that we really haven't thought through much in the past. For example, the federal tax code. More than 170 million people in the United States essentially get their health care because of decisions that were made with the tax code. It came about after World War II. All our courageous soldiers were coming home. We wanted them to get good health care, and there were wage and price controls that were in effect at the time. And I see some nods because I suspect there are a few people here who can actually remember what that was like. So what happened back then is people said, well, let's just dump it off on the employer. Let's say that health care is something we're going to try to do from the workplace, and the employer can get a break and the worker can get a break. Well, that was fine back in the 1940s, but it sure doesn't make sense in 2007 when people change their jobs 7 times by the time they're 35 years old, and our employers are up against global competition. You know, today if you open up a business in Beaverton and you're competing worldwide, you're spotting your foreign competition about 15, 20 points a day you open your doors, because your premiums are going up 13, 14%, and the people you're competing with overseas have their premiums paid for essentially by the government. So we can't sustain this, and that's one of the big changes I make in the Healthy Americans Act, is I say we're going to redirect the money that we spend in the tax code so as to get most of it to people in the middle income brackets and the lower middle income, so they're in a position to be able to purchase coverage. Right now, the way it works is if you're a high-flying CEO somewhere and you want to get a designer smile put on your face, you can do it, write off the cost of every dime of it on your taxes. But if you're a hard-working woman working at the furniture store in downtown Beaverton and your company hasn't been able to get a plan, you don't get a dime. And I don't think that's right. So I redirect the money to people in the middle. The second major thing that we do is put a new focus on health care rather than sick care. And what we have in this country to a great extent is a system that's stacked towards serious illness. And Medicare, we got a bunch of folks here who I think know a little bit about Medicare, shows the insanity of what we're doing better than anything else. Medicare Part A will pay thousands of dollars for a senior citizen's hospital bills, and Medicare Part B, the outpatient part, pays hardly anything to keep you well and to keep you from landing in the hospital. So I say we ought to get into the prevention, business, and so I give the authority to the Department of Health and Human Services for the first time to lower those Part B premiums for people who stay healthy. So if seniors are lowering their blood pressure, reducing their cholesterol, stopping smoking, for the first time they could get a lower Part B premium. And we have other incentives for prevention as well. One of the biggest single things that needs to change in the American healthcare system is we need to put a new focus on prevention. And then third, I wanted to bring up the role of the states, because a lot of people have been wondering, how are we going to deal with this? Should it be at the state level, be the federal level? What's the appropriate level for government to get into it? I think the states are doing some very good work, but the fact of the matter is they cannot fix problems they didn't cause. The tax code is federal. If you're serious about making changes in prevention, for example, making better use of health dollars, that's Medicare. That's federal as well. The big employer plans are covered under a federal law. It's called ERISA, the Employment Retirement Income Security Act. So these are federal kinds of changes, the ERISA law, the Medicare law, the tax law. You can't make these changes at the state level. So I think we should give a lot of credit to our state officials because they're doing a lot of good work given what little bandwidth they have to operate under. And it gets me to the last point, and that is some people are saying, oh, let's wait until we have another presidential election. So let's all go out and find out what Hillary thinks about this, and Romney thinks about this, and Giuliani thinks about it, and Edwards, and Huckabee, and you know the whole cast of characters. I'm the only person in the United States Senate to not be running for president. I thought there ought to be a designated driver. I thought there ought to be somebody there to take everybody who's intoxicated with their presidential prospects home after it didn't work out in Iowa and New Hampshire. So I understand that everybody's following what's going on with the presidential candidates. But folks, we didn't give people an election certificate to wait another 3 years to deal with health care. And what happens if there are other big challenges in 2009? Then it'll be another 3 or 4 more years. It is time to act on this. I think we've got an opportunity with our group of 5 senators, Democrats and Republicans, the first bipartisan health reform bill in almost 15 years to force action in this Congress, to defy the odds makers, to defy the naysayers who've said, well, we've been talking about it for 60 years, why don't we talk about it for another 10? This country cannot afford it. We cannot afford the cost hikes. We cannot afford the disadvantage our employers are facing. We have to deal with the changing demographics where there are going to be more older people. We cannot sustain the present system. So this now comes down to a question of political will. And one of the reasons I wanted to come to your terrific forum is that you all are activists. You're activists of all philosophies and parties and persuasions, which is what it's going to take to fix the health system. You know, some people say, well, let's go out and take the French system or the Canadian system or this person's system, or Michael Moore says go here and somebody else says go there. We need to come up with a system that is uniquely American. And you know who's got a uniquely American system, folks? And I'll wrap up with this. Take a guess who's covered by uniquely American healthcare system. You got it. And that's what I modeled my legislation around, is people would have choices like members of Congress. They'd have benefits like members of Congress. They'd have a delivery system like members of Congress. I got a Blue Cross card in my pocket, all right? And that's how the Wyden family gets health care, and come October, there are going to be 2 more of them, too. So I pay pretty close, attention. I'm already running a crib full employment program. Crib industry is getting a lot of business out of the Wydens for cribs scattered hither and thither. But seriously, we ought to have a delivery system and choices and benefits like members of Congress have, and that's what all Americans have a legal guarantee for under the Healthy Americans Act. For those of you that are web savvy, you can read it all on our website at wyden.senate.gov. We've also got copies of it, hard copies that we can make available, and we've tried to get them out to the senior centers and elsewhere. But I'm telling you, I don't think we should let those who've been elected to public office, either Democrats or Republicans or people of any philosophy, dawdle on this any longer. It's time for action. It is time for the richest, strongest, best country on earth to make sure that all Americans have good quality, affordable health care, and it should be done without further delay. Thank you. Questions? Softball questions are especially welcome, and let's talk. Can I have that? Thank you. Let's talk about whatever you're interested in.
Actually, Senator, can I give a couple of comments about this? So when you come out to make your questions, give your questions, please get real close to the microphone. If you're way back from it, some people way over in this area may not hear. So you want to be up nice and close to the microphone, and it does tilt up and down. Also down at the base, there's an adjustment down there too, so you can make it more at your level. So please, thank you very much. Questions short, to the point, and we'll get lots of questions in. Thank you. Thank
Chris
you, Senator.
Leslie, forum member. Would you please contrast the different lobbying groups like the medical, dental, nurses, hospital groups, and what they might be suggesting to you?
Question was about the various lobbying groups. What I did when I wrote the legislation, and I did it with a specific kind of objective in mind, was to say everybody is going to have to put some changes on the table that they have resisted in the past, and will also have some opportunities to be part of the solution. For example, I said to the private insurance industry, and worked with a creative CEO from the Blue Cross program for Northwest, Mark Gantz, I said, look, I believe that you all ought to have an opportunity to offer private choices, but it's going to have to be a different insurance marketplace. It's going to have to be one where you can't cherry pick. You can't just take healthy people and send sick people over to government programs more fragile than they are. You can't discriminate against people, you know, with illnesses. It's going to be a different insurance market with prevention and the like. So everybody has to give, and everybody has to, and everybody gets as part of this sort of reform. And I did that for provider groups and insurers. I've got malpractice reform changes. It's too much for trial lawyers. It's not enough for, you know, some on the other side. But I think that's how you build this kind of coalition. There are really three major approaches that have divided people up. One of them says we should essentially have government-run health care. You know, Medicare for all, single payer, something like that, almost like the Canadian model. Then there's another group that says we really shouldn't have much government at all. Should use health savings accounts and various consumer-driven approaches that are just in the marketplace. Senator Bennett and I come with the Healthy Americans Act, and he's a part of the Republican, you know, leadership, who are saying you got to cover everybody. That's been key to Democrats. There ought to be a reformed private marketplace. That's been key to Republicans. And I think that gives us a chance to bridge some of the philosophical divide between those interest groups you're talking about. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think you just covered my question. Nancy Lewis of the Forum, and I'm concerned about, of that large $1 trillion figure you gave that we spend on health care.
$2 trillion. $2 trillion. 2.3. 2.3
trillion. How much of that goes to the insurance industry? How much of that is profit for insurance? Why don't we get them out of the middle?
Yeah. The Citizens Health Care Working Group that was actually created by the statute that Orrin Hatch, the senator from Utah, and I, you know, wrote, tried to get their arms around exactly how much is spent on administration. You know, the highest figure is it's 30%, some say it's 2%. My guess is that it's probably in the vicinity of 15, 13, somewhere in there. The good private companies, I think, and this is what is projected in our legislation, can do it in the vicinity of 5, 6%, which of course is still a pretty solid amount for administration. But I think, to be completely accurate, nobody has been able to put their hands on the percentage on administration, because at some point the lines blur between salaries and sort of paperwork costs. If you don't have electronic medical records, for example, you spend a lot more on paperwork and the like. But I think 5% with good private practices is a realistic target figure. The question is, and some have said, well, let's just get rid of them all. There are a whole bunch of countries that use private insurers whether it's Switzerland or Netherlands, Israel, variety of countries that use private insurers that have been able to lower the costs and deliver good quality care and ensure choice. I just don't think at this time in our country's history where people are just going to be willing to hand everything off, to the government. What we ought to have is private choices where the companies compete not the way they do today, which is to take healthy people, but they compete on the basis of price, benefit, and quality. There's competition around the things that we'd like to see competition around, and not this kind of filtering, game where they just try to find, people who eat granola 3 times a day and have 2% body fat. Yeah.
Nancy Lewis actually asked my question, but thank you for coming today. I worked at the state legislature as a citizen lobbyist on a tax measure where uninsured poor children would receive insurance through cigarette tax, and that will be on the ballot in November, and I ask everyone to vote yes. But what I discovered in working in Salem was that this issue divides between the haves and the have-nots. And those who have really aren't very concerned about the have-nots. How would you sell your plan to overcome that problem? Terrific question, and one that I spent a lot of time, dealing with. First of all, the haves today, many of them, are very much aware that they are one rate hike away from being a have-not. All right? I mean, the employer-based system in particular, which is where many of the haves are, is every year with the premium, hikes that they're seeing reduced benefits and additional, co-pays. I think it's fair to say a lot of those haves look at their coverage through their employer as like a popsicle melting on the August, sidewalk. I mean, it becomes less and less every year. So what I said for those people is I said as part of the transition, I'm going to take several specific steps. I'm going to put more cash in your pocket, which we do by, in effect, cashing people out at employer-based health care. They would get the value of their wage plus the cash value of their health care. So I'm putting more cash in their pocket. Second, I'm giving them more choices. Right now, they basically take the coverage that they get from their employer. I would give them more choices. So with more choices, you might be able to save a few $100 and you can take your family fishing on the Rogue River or something like that. So more cash in your pocket, more choices. Third, and all important, portability. You will have the coverage with you no matter what happens. You change your job, you go bankrupt, you go this, some that. You will have coverage with you forever. There's total portability. And the last flip side of portability is security. It is coverage that can never be taken away. So with those 4 changes, a lot of the people that you call haves, and they are haves, but a lot of them are one rate hike away from falling into that, into that part of the healthcare system where they go to bed at night, practically paralyzed with fear about what's ahead. I think we can bring those people on board, and you're spot on. Those are the people who've resisted change in the past. I think with those 4 changes, we can bring them over to support this.
Senator Wyden, my name is Bill Kroger. I'm a retired Army officer. I'm also secretary of the Veterans in Action Political Action Committee. One of the things we want to do is to get our role in Iraq over with ended. And I thank you for your votes toward that end. My question is what's your best assessment of that whole situation, if we can get out, and if so, maybe when do you think that might happen?
Well, for anybody who wants to focus on Iraq, I'm going to be having town hall meetings this week specifically on that topic. We'll be at Portland State tomorrow, Mary, between 12 and 1:30 or something like that, and that's going to be in Hoffman Hall tomorrow, Portland State. Bring your tuna fish sandwich and educate me about Iraq. September, obviously, the key month. General Petraeus coming in with his report. I'll tell you what I'm really focused on. I think it's the key question. You've been reading in the papers all about the debate involving the surge and this, big push with the additional troops, and it's all about tactics. Are we doing better in Al Anbar province, or are we doing worse, and this and that? And the president's supporters are saying that they're doing better, and the president's opponents are saying they're doing worse. That misses the point. The point of the surge was to in some way bring about political reconciliation in Iraq and give them adequate time to do it. And on all of the key measures, that is not happening. They're not making progress with the oil law. They're not making progress with the local elections. They're not making progress with the de-Baathification, bringing the former opponents back into the government. So I remain very much committed to legislation that starts bringing our people home. I think it's absolutely critical that our courageous soldiers, these patriotic, courageous, valiant soldiers, not be put any longer in the position of refereeing a civil war in Iraq. As part of bringing them home, we're going to continue to retain a presence in terms of counterterrorism, in terms of training Iraqis, in terms of protecting our people and our assets. I mean, there are a number of things that need to be done, but we need to start bringing our people home, and I have so voted for some time. And I was one of 23 in the United States Senate who voted no on the war in Iraq, and I think it was the most important vote that I've cast in my time in public service.
John Leeper, Forum member. I want to commend you, sir, for all your good work on health care. I would, however, also like to expand the discussion to broader than just that subject.
Fair enough.
Washington County has had your support for a Tualatin Basin water resource project and a water title transfer project. And I would just like to know, sir, can we in Washington County continue expecting your support on those two efforts? Because water is going to, I think, in the long haul, become critically more important as Washington County's population goes up.
I have supported those two projects in the past. I will continue to do so. I think you're absolutely right in terms of talking about its importance. It's critically important to the future of Washington County. It's critically important to our state, and we will see it's going to come up in a variety of different ways this year. The Farm Bill will be talking about the Klamath and others. This has great impact on the future of our state and its well-being, and I will definitely support those Washington County projects.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, I'm Marilyn McWilliams. I'm a forum member, and I want to applaud your support for preventive medicines for health. I think it's the only cost-effective way to approach this. And I want to also kind of address the obesity epidemic in the United States, and also the fact that people who are of lower income cannot afford good food in the United States right now. We subsidize sugar and refined grains and so on in this country, and I would like to challenge the Senate to overhaul the Farm Bill so we start subsidizing fruits and vegetables and healthy food in this country so that people of low income, people of every income level can afford good food.
Yeah. Great question. And my general position when people ask me about subsidies is I always say, instead of ratcheting subsidies up, let's ratchet everybody's subsidy down. Because instead of bringing more government into something, when government has contributed much to the problem, the answer generally is not to bring more government into it. And the bill in the healthcare area is called the Healthy Americans Act for a reason. And that is, instead of just spending, on services in health, particularly when people are very ill, we've got to get a new focus on prevention and wellness. And the challenge is to find that spot between kind of setting up a nanny state where you have the federal government saying, oh, we're going to watch out for the potato chip bowl, and we're going to restrict people from this and that, and things that would clearly be unacceptable to the public, to find something between there and the status quo. And that's what we've tried to do. For example, historically, the government has always mandated this, that, something else as it relates to children, where the parents are required to go out and take this, that, or some other step. And sometimes they do it, and sometimes they don't, but there are a lot of reasons why it doesn't take place. Under our legislation, if somebody signs up for a health program, a health plan, the plan would be required to give information to the parents about preventive services in the area. Plans have agreed to do this. And then the parent, if the parent takes the child to the preventive services, the kind of programs you're talking about, for the first time, the parent would be eligible for a discount on the parent's premium. So you bring the whole family into the kind of effort to promote good health and wellness, not by using more government mandates, but by focusing on incentives, and particularly ones that are directed towards prevention and wellness. So we're very excited about the support we picked up on the preventive side, and this is the only piece of legislation that is really geared to making the centerpiece prevention and keeping people healthy.
Good afternoon, Senator. Kathy Stanton, Forum member. First, I want to thank you for your stand on phantom bill blockers, as reported in today's Oregonian.
No more secret holds. It's about time. What a quaint idea. Public business ought to be done in public. Now, that's really revolutionary stuff, huh?
Yes. No, it isn't revolutionary. I guess it was revolutionary 250, 30, 40 years ago. My questions have to do with transportation. I will be not doing a medical question. Can you tell us how the reauthorization of the Highway Infrastructure Trust Fund is going, and also funding of the dredging of the Columbia? Two important bills for us, or funds for us, because of our heavy reliance on trade here in the Portland region.
As you know, we've been able to keep dredging pretty much on track. We've been very lucky to have Senator Murray on the Appropriations Committee, and of course from Washington State, and we share the river. She's been very supportive, and we'll be turning to the appropriations bills here before long, because this is the period when the end of the fiscal year is coming up. In terms of transportation, there will be a new transportation bill in the next session of Congress. I intend to pursue my Build America Bonds program, something that we had a fair amount of interest in during the last debate, and I think with bridges falling down, there's going to be new support for that. But clearly, you cannot have, and you see this in Washington County especially, you cannot have big league quality of life with little league transportation systems. They go hand in hand. I always love hearing all these political types talking about family values. Well, if you're serious about family values, make it possible for somebody to get out of the car and get to their family. Because we got people sitting in these traffic jams in our state where nobody dreamed of being in a traffic jam not very long ago. And so it's going to be a big priority, and it'll be part of our bipartisan agenda for the state. Yes.
Senator, I'm Louis Payne. I'm a forum member and a member of a citizens lobbying group that deals with tax matters. I'd like to ask you a question about the estate tax. As you know, roughly 1 or 2% of the population are affected by this. Under the current administration, this exemption has increased, and there is talk about increasing it even further, as much as up to $5 million. I wonder if I could have your thoughts on that.
I don't think the estate tax exemption increased under the Bush administration. Was that put in the 2001 change? Yes, right. It went in the 2001 change. I don't think there's going to be any action on the estate taxes during the last part of this administration. I do hope that we'll see action on my fair flat tax, because what I want to do is I want to say, instead of these thousands and thousands of changes that go mostly to lobbies, I want to take that money to lower rates for everybody, get rid of clutter, and have a one-page 1040 form. And I'm going to make a big push for that, even in this session of Congress. You've probably seen this debate about the hedge fund taxes, and that's going to give us an opportunity to look for tax reform. So I don't expect that we'll have any more changes in the tax as it relates to estate taxes between now and 2010. And I do think that debate is going to heat up as we get closer to 2010. And I hope my fair flat tax can come in as an alternative that can bring both sides together.
Bill Foster, Forum member. Do you see certain opposition to this Healthy Act that you're promoting within the Congress? And if so, where does it come from?
Question was opposition in terms of the Healthy Americans Act. There's something in there for just about everybody to get angry about. In other words, the trial lawyer provision they feel it goes too far. The insurance companies think that too much is being asked of them. Probably providers can find things that they don't like. The employers still have a role. They could resist it. But I think we've managed. When I had the kickoff, I had the CEO of Safeway standing on one side of me and the president of the largest labor union, Andy Stern, Service Employees Union, standing next to me. And we had the NFIB member from Oregon, the National Federation of Independent Businesses. So I think we've got a coalition that's got steam behind it. But there's no question that all of these major interest groups can put a bullseye on my back and say, here's something we don't like. We're going to spend $1 million on television commercials saying that if you pass this, Western civilization is going to come to an end. But I think there's a lot more of us who feel that we cannot keep in place what we have and ensure America's greatness. We've got to make these changes that update a system that was largely set in motion 70 years ago and made sense then, but doesn't make sense for this century. Very good.
Senator Wyden, I'm Margie Lockman. I'm a resident of Washington County, and I've been a fan of yours ever since the Gray Panthers was
I better
born.
quit while I'm ahead.
Thank you for the work that you do, especially on the Healthy Americans Act. But my question is about the Constitution. Democracy is one of the greatest ideas that humans have ever conceived, and it has worked well for over 200 years because of the rule of law under the Constitution. That Constitution is being destroyed. And my question to you is, what are you doing now, and what do you plan to do in the fall, in the coming year, to defend that Constitution?
What areas, what policies do you feel are most violative of the Constitution in your view?
The laws need to be enforced, and they cannot be gotten around by secrecy and by signing statements and all the other monkey shines that have gone on.
I'm against monkey shines. But seriously, I mean, this administration has taken power for the executive branch like no other in my lifetime. Look, there's always been jockeying between the executive branch and the legislative branch and the use of what's called executive privilege, but nobody has thought about using signing statements hundreds and hundreds of times. For all of those who are not familiar with this, it basically means is The Congress and the President work together on a piece of legislation. The President signs it, and then sort of at the bottom says, I didn't really mean it. Gosh, you know, I'm not going to go along with this, or I'm not going to go along with that, when they had all the opportunities as part of the discussion to be heard. And the way we do it in this country is you work to bring about changes, and if your side doesn't get it at that particular point, you come back and try to change it the next time. You don't just say, we're going to ignore the law. So I've been equally, troubled about this, and I try to change as many of these policies as I can. Everywhere I go, people ask me, should the president be impeached and the like, and I think that's almost the flip side of your question. And what I'll tell you is I've already been through one impeachment process, and these are very polarizing for the country, and they essentially take everybody's attention away from what I think most people say they want most, and that is they want to bring our folks home in Iraq, they want to fix health care, they want a new energy policy, a new red, white, and blue energy policy, and they want better schools. And I think there is a sense that if you go off on impeachment, you spend all your time on that, and you won't be dealing with these matters that are so important to everybody in their living room and their kitchen table. So I will try to change as many of these policies, and you touched on several as I can, and we'll have an election in 2008, and my sense is the person who's going to win the 2000 election is going to be the person who's got some ideas about how they're going to change those policies you disagree with.
Right. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Senator. I'm Lee Coleman, Forum member. And in your overall thinking about health care and sick care, have you taken the VA system into account? And is there any chance we can get several $billion more for the VA? And is there any chance that we can get adequate treatment on an ongoing basis for the rest of their lives for the poor souls who are coming back from Iraq, damaged to beat all hell and seriously impaired with post-traumatic distress? A lot of veterans, new veterans, are hurting, and a good part of it is just money, because the VA is shrinking.
Our country really has no idea what's ahead with all of these veterans' health concerns. And I was struck when I was there. I went with Senator Snowe, the Republican senator from Maine. Is what you have is essentially state-of-the-art battlefields, state-of-the-art medical facilities, just a few hundred yards from the battlefield. And you have soldiers surviving in those facilities who even a few years ago could not possibly have survived. And they basically, with the wonderful doctors and facilities there, they managed somehow to save the lives of our courageous soldiers, and they're there for a couple of days, and then off they go in the medical air facilities, and they're going to be back here with extraordinary health care needs. And then it really comes down to choices, folks. Who do you really want to make your priority? Are you going to say that oil companies should get tax breaks that even their executives say they don't need? I know that because I asked them in an open hearing. They all said they don't need these tax breaks. So are you going to give them tax breaks that they say they don't need, or are you going to put the money into veterans, health services? I'm voting, I'm working to put the money into those services for veterans.
Hi, Senator John Seiner. I was going to ask her a question about whether structural change in the areas of health care, et cetera, were really possible. I think most of America is really skeptical about the possibility of actually changing like large systems which survive off inertia. you can answer that question. You can kind of tell me what's going to happen with regard to the bill that sunsets in 180 days with regard to Mr. Bush's secret warrants, et cetera. Whichever one you want to tackle, I'll be more willing to listen to either of them.
Two points. First, I'm very much aware, and I thought a lot about that in writing the Healthy Americans Act, that a good part of the country thinks the federal government can't organize a two-car parade, let alone do anything with health care. So I'm very much aware of it, which is why I spent 4 years on this, and I would go out and talk to people, just like we're doing today, and run an idea by them and get their input, and then go talk to a bunch of experts and get their ideas, and then go back to town meetings in Oregon and try again. And I think we've got something now, and that was why your question was so good when you talked about the haves, because the haves have historically said, hey, the devil I know is kind of better than the devil I don't know, because those people in government can't find their tailbone with both hands. And I'm not sympathetic to this question of dramatic changes. I think we figured out how to do it in a way that's going to have people say, all right, after 70 years, we've got to modernize this system. With respect to the FISA law, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, let me just make a quick comment. I sit on the Intelligence Committee. My daughter is 18, as only 18-year-olds will do. She got in the car the other day and said, so, Dad, how about telling me a little bit about what's going on your so-called Intelligence Committee? And I said, Lily, I can't get into it. Otherwise, you'll disappear or something like that. But here's the point. It is a dangerous time for the country. There are very real threats. But, folks, it didn't just get dangerous in the few days before there was a congressional recess and this big push to have this done. And let me kind of just sort of paint what I'm not going to get into the specifics of wiretapping and that kind of thing. I don't think that's appropriate. But there was a real problem with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is that we have to be able to make sure that communications from people who are linked to terrorism and who are overseas, a foreign communication to another foreign communication, can be picked up, apprehended, listened to, when it involves something that, I'll put it according to the press, goes through an American server, an American communications system. This law, regrettably, went considerably beyond that, because in the whole kind of hullabaloo of the last few days and who's going to be tough on terrorism and who's not, I think it was an overreach. And the founding fathers and the beauty of our system has always been to make the constitutional teeter-totter work. It was always about the collective security, the collective well-being, which in this case means to fight terrorism ferociously, while at the same time being sensitive to individual liberty. And the constitutional teeter-totter is based on something that works really like this. And this FISA law throws it out of whack. It's over the line. It's an overreach. And I hope that we'll be able, when Congress comes back, to correct it, get the constitutional teeter-totter back in balance. We should be on the offensive relentlessly against terror. And it's critically important. But we can do it without throwing people's constitutional rights in the trash can. Nellie?
It's wonderful to welcome you out here to the forum. Shall we confess how long we've known each other?
Nellie Fox and Mary Alice are the gold standard in terms of public service to our states, and we've been fighting the good fight, especially Nellie and Mary Alice, for an awful long time.
You were a lobbyist for the Gray Panthers when I first knew you.
Full head of hair and rugged good luck.
Well, we're certainly happy to have you where you are. I'm sure that you have heard of Dr. Kitzhaber's Archimedes program. What is your honest opinion about that program?
As he has done so many times, Dr. Kitzhaber's on to some very important ideas. He particularly wants to see the states have a wide berth for innovation and reform. It's something I'm very sympathetic with. We share very similar ideas about prevention, the focus on health, the change in the employer-based system, and he and I have talked many times about healthcare reform, and we try to do everything we can to encourage his good work.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
And Senator, we have time for one more question. Looks like we have one more questioner, so lead on.
Timing's everything. Patrick Wheeler, forum member. How does your medical bill deal with technology? We're keeping people alive and spending a fortune in the last 30 days when nature should take its course. And, you know, we're bankrupt. We've got a bankrupt healthcare system currently, and that's a major portion of it as I see it.
This question about end-of-life care, of course, is something we as Oregonians know a little bit about. You know, I had to filibuster in the United States Senate to make sure your vote was protected. You know, you all voted twice for the Death with Dignity law, and it passed the House to get rid of Oregon's law, and I went to the floor of the United States Senate and said, if you're going to roll our small state, you better plan to be there for a long, 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 long. You've got the drift, and we were able to protect it. But, you know, obviously, these are matters for the states, and my sense is the country is not ready to go where our citizens have courageously gone. And so what I tried to do in the Healthy Americans Act, as with most of this, is to try to find a middle ground that could bring both sides together. We, of course, promoted hospice. You know what's been striking about the Oregon Death with Dignity law, the most dramatic development has been our significant increase in the use of hospice. I bet you, and no one would ever be able to prove it, because you can never really prove a negative, my guess is there are fewer assisted suicides in our state with a law than there are in most states without a law, because the really dramatic change has been the very significant increase in the use of hospice, folks spending their last days at home, and it's come about because of the tremendous education effort and the discussion and the effort to try to find common ground that we've been part of as Oregonians. So what we try to do in the Healthy Americans Act is to create more options for folks at the end of life in terms of making information available in a more accessible kind of way. We changed the hospice benefit in a way that was acceptable to both sides. Right now, you sort of have to give up the prospect of getting a cure in order to get the hospice benefit, which really seems to be wrong-headed, because what you're doing is taking away people's hope, and that's contrary to what we want in American healthcare. So I think the expanded array of choices for folks at the end of life, which we've done through Medicare and the private sector under the legislation, strikes the kind of common ground approach for these difficult issues that are as much personal and religious and ethical as anything else. And you cannot sit in Washington, D.C. and say, I hereby appoint myself the czar of healthcare, which is why you probably saw I filibustered the Terry Schiavo law. I was the one who objected to the Terry Schiavo law. I said, how in the world are you going to put members of Congress in the position of being the ethical czar of all of these terrible cases that have divided families? So I objected to the Terry Schiavo law. And I think at the end of the day, and this is a good one to quit on. What we see in healthcare is representative of the great challenge in American democracy. Healthcare involves all of us, 300 million of us. It's 1/7 of the economy. There are no costs growing as fast as healthcare costs. I have brought to the people of Oregon and the people of this country the first bipartisan health reform bill in almost 15 years. But I want you to know, I don't have all the answers. I don't pretend that the Healthy Americans Act is the last word in all this. My goodness, this is more like the first word. But I think we're getting the structure right. And with the kind of thoughtful comments here at the Washington County Public Affairs Forum, and that I'm getting around the state, I think this time, after 70 years of debate, we are, as a country, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, whatever your party, whatever your philosophy is, I think we are up to taking on the premier domestic issue of our time, fixing health care, and Godspeed to all of you. Thanks.
Senator Wyden, thank you so much. And everybody, very appreciative. I'm sure that you were able to take time to be here, so thank you.